The Federal Trade Commission is reviewing its guidelines on vertical mergers, or a company's acquisition of other components in its supply chain. But these guidelines jeopardize national security, according to General Hawk Carlisle, U.S. Air Force retired. He's president and CEO of the National Defense Industrial Association. He's former commander of Air Combat Command, and he's writing about vertical mergers and national security for Defense News. General, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks, Mimi. It's great to see you.
Well,
appreciate being on.
Competition is good and healthy for an economy. What is it about the FTC's stance on vertical mergers that's worrying you?
Well, I think, it's the change in the way the ecosystem for innovation works in this country. In the past, federal dollars went into defense and NASA and federal programs, and a lot of innovation and technology was developed, and then it spun off into the commercial world, or large companies like, back in the day when Bell Labs was part of AT&T, there was a lot of innovation there that went into defense and then spun off into commercial. But the ecosystem today is really the small innovative startups that are trying new and groundbreaking technologies, and then venture capitalists that take bets on whether those are going to work or not. A majority of them don't. But you have the venture capitalists that are investing in these small startups. And the idea that you cannot then merge these small innovative startups with larger companies that have the ability to scale their technology and really produce for the government and for the Department of Defense, you really inhibit that innovation ecosystem if the FTC is really hard over about these vertical mergers.
Yeah, so what is the position that the FTC is taking, and why do you think it's important for them to kind of relook at that position?
So today, I think what the FTC sees it as a limited competition, but it really isn't, because it's not, vertical mergers aren't companies buying their competition, they're just buying somebody in the supply chain. And so I think the FTC position, they did lower the standards, so more of these mergers are coming into the realm of the FTC for consideration. So that's part of the problem. But I think there are cases where there's a thin supply chain and competitors are all buying from the same supplier. And in that case, a vertical merger can potentially inhibit competition. But in that case, the FTC could find a way to mitigate that by making an access agreement for other companies to buy from that supply chain. So there's ways to mitigate that challenge, but that's the only place where it really limits competition, is where the supply chain is dwindling down to either one or just a couple of suppliers. And if somebody buys that in a merger or acquisition, then you can potentially limit somebody else, a competitor, from getting that same supply. But they can mitigate that risk, I think, going forward.
You've said that the FTC's kind of negative stance on vertical mergers can harm national security. General, can you give me a specific example where that could be the case?
I don't know if I can give you a specific example. I think what I would say is there's cases where I think it's a real limiting problem. Our supply chain in the United States Defense Industrial Base is fragile, and we learned that even more so during COVID. So there's cases where the supply chain is dwindling, and some suppliers, maybe the sole remaining supplier for defense capability, energetics is one that you can think of, or there's a couple of different cases where there's only one supplier left, and unfortunately, because of the market environment, because of predatory practices by our potential adversaries out there, that they can't stay functioning. So if they're not vertically merged with a company that can support them and scale them, then they'll go out of business, and you'll end up not having that supply chain that has access to the Department of Defense. So I think that's the biggest problem going forward.
So let's talk about competition with China, both economically and militarily. How do vertical mergers play into that?
So China is obviously autocratic, and they, basically the government has access to whatever and every technology that they want that's produced in that country, and they're doing everything in their power to steal technology and to copy technology or to buy technology and then scale it within their system. And so in that system, they can put money wherever they want. They can dictate companies do what they want them to do, and that provides a level of speed. In our case, in the United States, in a free enterprise system, and the values that we hold is we allow companies to go out and do that. And that's why vertical mergers are so important. Companies will often spin off, or there'll be a small startup that has a great technology, and they'll develop it, and it'll pay off, and venture capitalists will invest in it to give them the ability to make it pay off. And then it needs to be merged with a larger company that can scale it and get it to market at the level it needs to get. If you cut off these vertical mergers, then you're probably going to limit that amount of venture capital that's going to go into these small startups, and you're going to limit that innovation that is being pushed by the Chinese in trying to replace us both militarily and economically.
Finally, General, if you could speak directly to the FTC commissioners right now, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say to them, look at the ecosystem that is in the innovation in our country today. And it's these small startups, very innovative. That's the power of our people, the power of the American people, to develop new ideas, to think outside of the box and come up with solutions. They need that venture capitalist money to be able to develop it and to survive, to get to that level of success with their technologies. And then it needs to be able to scale to support this country across both the commercial sector and the federal sector. And so they need to be able to merge. So what I'd ask FTC commissioners is to look at that ecosystem and understand it. And in cases where it does limit competition, find ways to mitigate, i.e. access agreements and other things going forward.
All right. Well, General Carlisle, nice talking to you. Thanks so much for being on the program.
It was great talking to you, Mimi. Thank you.